is Stephanie Mann, Executive Director of Safe Kids Now, an organization that is nationwide and growing. Today's subject is Stephanie Mann's personal experiences working as a crime prevention consultant. And this lady's been doing this for 35 years plus. So she has a great deal of wisdom and information behind her. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Rebecca. But who's counting, right? Yes, this goes back quite a few years. Maybe I'll start out by telling you a little bit about uh, Shirley Henke and I wrote a book called Alternative to Fear, Guidelines for Safer Neighborhoods. And we had a lot of feedback about that book, which helped launch the National Neighborhood Watch program. And as a result of that, we went on to form a Citizens Crime Prevention Committee for our county. And we had a lot of problems. As a matter of fact, the police voted, the Police Chiefs Association voted against us for having this organization because they said, and this goes back in 1980s, we would become vigilantes. And,
Things have
and
changed. I'm so glad.
what? We're not going to be vigilantes. We're going to work with you. We saw our role as to helping the citizens become more responsible for their own neighborhoods because that's what our book was based on, the alternative to fear. It was about empowering citizens to take charge of their own neighborhood safety. So we thought it was rather amusing that they thought we were all going to become vigilantes. Well, may I say that we proved them wrong. But in the process of organizing the Citizens Crime Prevention Committee, we gave ourselves the role of organizing 27 committees throughout our community, and these were community groups of volunteers that would go out and organize neighborhoods. So you can see it was kind of a spider thing, where every community was working at in a different way based on their own community needs. Well, one of our coordinators was Ruby, and Ruby worked in a high crime neighborhood. And she called me up one day and she says, Stephanie, I'm having a lot of problems here, and I'm not quite sure what to do about the police officer that keeps coming to our meetings. Now, see, that was part of the agreement in getting the Police Chiefs Association to work with us, is that they would have a police officer in some of our meetings to monitor us to make sure we weren't going to become vigilantes. So I said, okay, I'll come to your next meeting and I'll see, what's going on. And if we need be, we'll talk to somebody else, see what's happening with the police and your police officer. Well, Ruby had given everybody the assignment of coming up with their own neighborhood plan on how to keep their neighborhood safe. So everybody came to the meeting, and I went to this particular meeting, and they had a big thumb board, tack board, and they brought their plan. And so everybody got up and talked about what their ideas were. Some people thought they should have a block party. Some people thought they should have a cleanup committee or a cleanup campaign. Some thought they ought to have games for the kids for the summer. Others thought, the ideas were great. But then they started talking about some of the problems they had with the police in their community. And I thought, okay, now we're getting into an interesting realm here. And they were very upset because they thought that the police were hassling them. And we were telling them to take charge of their own neighborhood. And so there was a conflict going on here. The police officer was getting a little antsy, I could see, because they were criticizing some of the police tactics as to why they didn't come, why they didn't respond, why somebody got shoved, why somebody had a problem with an officer, and no, they couldn't get any response from the police department. And finally, the police officer got very annoyed, and he stood up, and he had written something on his piece of paper. He went up to the board and he tacked this right on the middle of everybody else's pages that they'd put up. He tacked this right in the middle of it, and he said, "I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. As you are the crime prevention committee for this area," he said, "you are going to report to me. I am in charge of this neighborhood housing project." And he said, "This is what we are going to do. And here is my phone number. And if you have a problem, you're to call me." And of course, this didn't settle very well with the residents, because here they were trying to work out a plan for the whole neighborhood. And he's saying, "I'm in charge. You do it my way." And that wasn't flying too well. So there was a lot of, mixing it up a little bit. And so after the meeting, Ruby and I were cleaning up, and we were putting our easel back together and packing up. And he was heading out the door as we were just about to leave. And he took his shoulder as I headed by him, and he knocked me into the wall. Well, this is called intimidation. He was sending me a message that I'm in control here, I'm in charge. Well, Ruby and I were a little upset. So the next morning, we were sitting in the police chief's office, and we made it very clear that we were not happy with this officer's reaction. Now, that officer was removed from us. The police chief agreed, and he said, "No, that should not have happened." And he said, "I will reprimand him, and he will be transferred to another area." And we got a different officer who was wonderful, very supportive, very nice. But let me just say this. There are police officers that have their own version of how things ought to go. And it is up to you as citizens to make sure that you speak up if you have a problem, because that was the first thing we did. We went right to the police department and talked to the police chief and told him our grievance personally, because we thought that was a big grievance, and he did too. So let me just say that all police officers are not perfect. They're all human beings. They have the same fears that all the rest of us have. But if we have a specific problem with someone, we need to speak up. Because we could have just let it go by, and he could have come to the next meeting. He could have pulled our whole meeting apart. He could have destroyed the whole network of people that we had built. And then that would have been a failure. And we would have seen it as a failure. So, but it would have been on his watch, because we allowed him to get away with it. We did not allow that to happen. We had a great group. We got a very good police officer to work with us in this housing project, and we made real insight and gains and stopped a lot of crime as a result. So that's my message, and that's our story about one police officer that tried to stop things, but we didn't let him do it.
People should realize that there are two kinds of police officers. There are police officers that use their position to flex their muscle.
All
and
right.
there are police officers that use their position to protect their citizens. And
Yeah.
they're not the same.
No. And believe me, most of our police officers are wonderful police officers and dedicated to protect and serve. But then there are a few that have their own, as you say, want to use their own muscle to control. And I bet they do it in their own marriage.
I bet they do. That's the nature of their personality. The thing is that they are the smaller number of the policemen, and we should realize that they are not the whole. It's just like taking one apple to spoil the whole barrel.
Right.
We need to realize that these rotten apples are not the entire police force, not even close to being anything more than a minute amount.
Right. And if you have a problem with a police officer, do not let it go by. Make sure you register your complaint and make sure your voice is heard. And if you want to have a bigger voice, get organized with your neighbors, work with your neighbors. Remember, the police work for the citizens. The citizens do not work for the police.
The thing is, if we will, as citizens, take the responsibility for our neighborhood and take the responsibility back to where it belongs. For example, a while back you were talking about children that were misbehaving and completely out of line,
Right.
and the neighbors went and talked to their parents and they solved the problem. If one neighbor had gone to speak to those parents, it might not have worked, but they went in group
Right.
and said, what can we do to help? And it changed everything around. Quite frequently, if one neighbor goes and talks to a parent, the parent will be angry and stand by the child and feel affronted.
Right.
But if several go in an act of kindness and say, we realize you're having a problem, what can we do to help? Because
That's
we
a
have
whole
experienced, yeah,
It really is. It changes the whole environment about how do you approach and solve problems. Okay.
Stephanie, there are so many wonderful people in your neighborhood.
Oh, yes.
If we can concentrate on those that really care, you can tell when you meet responsible people. After a while, you can't necessarily read them immediately, but also follow your gut instincts. You know, if your dog and your cat and your kids don't like him, maybe you should look at them twice.
That's one way to do it.
There you go.
Well, I think you tell people are good people by their actions,
Right.
how they treat their children, how husband and wives treat each other, and how they treat their neighbors. Uh, you can, I mean, we all had really bad neighbors, and neighbors that drive us crazy. But that's why you need to connect with the good people that are in there, because most of our neighbors are great people.
When we see all of these people gather in the street and attack police cars and they're angry with the police, and we see this so much on TV, something goes wrong and they go attack the police, then the next thing they do is go break the windows out of the shops and destroy the shops. Now, I don't feel a logical person has any right to condemn the police for an injustice that they turn around and do on some innocent shopkeeper. I don't get that. What is
Well,
that?
that's not really the issue. Um, what you, Everybody has a right to protest, and
Right.
protest is good.
Right.
And say we want a better police department, but you really need to be involved in order to get that better police department. You need to speak up without screaming at each other. But what you're seeing in Ferguson or in Baltimore with the violence, those are criminals. Those are just plain. Uh, well, I think they even said on the news that these were Crips and Bloods gang members that had gotten together and say, this is our opportunity to go out and just be angry and destroy. And that's what they did. My concern was I didn't see the police reacting very fast because that should have been nipped right in the bud before it got out of control. And it got out of control in Baltimore. But those were criminals that go and, you know, smash windows and burn down buildings and loot. These are not good people. And it's the mob mentality. There's some, and these were mostly teenage boys, if you listen. And so what we're talking about is angry kids who don't feel a part of the community. They have no responsibility to keep it clean. They have no they haven't been given those responsibilities. They have no responsibility to take charge and help their neighbors. They have no responsibility for cleaning their yard. We have got to do a much better job as parents to give kids jobs in the neighborhood so they feel that they're part of it. When you see a 71% increase of ISIS recruiting members of our communities to join ISIS, what you're looking at are young people that don't feel connected to the community. They don't feel cared about in their community. And that does not come from more money thrown at the problem. It does not come from having more laws, and it doesn't come from hiring more police. It comes from connected neighbors, knowing each other, talking to each other, creating a healthy, happy place for people to grow. And if that doesn't happen in some of our neighborhoods, you see gangs forming. Gangs form when there's no adult guidance. Gangs form when people feel alienated. And then the good people, because they feel isolated and alone, they're not connected with neighbors, they back off. They back off and sit behind locked doors and say, whoa, I hope this stops. I hope this goes away. I want the police to solve these problems. That's not how it works. Now, it's taken us generations to get into these problems. It's going to take us a long time to get out of it because we need more men in the neighborhood, responsible men working with these boys. We need responsible men standing up and helping the community. We don't need people just sitting in church praying. We need them out there connecting and helping to connect. One of the biggest Bible tenets for our churches is love thy neighbor. Galatians 5:14. We aren't doing that in many of our communities, and our churches could be doing a much better job of just helping the people right around the church and encouraging their parishioners. Go out and get connected with your neighbors, get to know them, and there are so many benefits, and your kids will reap the positive benefits of all of that if there are people connected in their lives. Disconnection, social isolation, and fear are running rampant in these neighborhoods. That's why you are seeing the fires, the vandalism, the looting, the shooting. And if we're going to stop it, we have got to do a better job of helping our communities take responsibility. And one of the things that we advocate is exactly what we did 35 years ago, 40 years ago. And that is every city should have, and in a big city, you have it divided into blocks. You know, I think in Oakland, California, there are 7 different districts. Well, if each district had a citizens committee, an outreach action committee, not one that sits there and talks to each other and says how awful it is, but citizens committee that actually go out, help promote, talk to their clubs, talk to the churches, and say, you guys, we want this community safe, but you're going to have to make it happen. That's how you change a community. That's how you make it safe. And hiring more police. Let me just say this. If you hired 5 police officers, it'll cost you about $650,000. You really think 5 more police officers in a city is going to change that? And look at the cost to the taxpayers. It costs nothing for people to actually connect with neighbors. It costs nothing to go out and make your kids safe by connecting with neighbors, talking to them, getting to know them, addressing issues, problem solving. Do you have a pothole? Do you have a problem with a drug dealer in the neighborhood?
Stephanie, let's take the moment that we see on TV where the people are attacking the police cars. The police are standing there behind shields, and then they go break out all the windows in the shops. It seems to me that one logical voice on a loudspeaker could say, why can you accuse the police of violence when you're being violent toward other American citizens? It seems to me that some logic is lost, because what happens is the police then are honor bound to do what they must do to keep the violence down, so they try not to react because the criminals want to up the ante as an excuse to shoot a cop.
Mhm.
And they know it.
Oh, yeah.
So there's such a complete social insanity going on right there on the screen, and nobody points their finger at that insanity. It goes on the next newscast to say how bad the police are, and nobody says how bad the behavior was. You show it in a picture, but nobody calls it for what it is.
And that's, you run a good point here, Rebecca, because this has been manifesting itself for years. These kids are alienated, many are fatherless, they have no direction, and they are angry. Angry people, angry young people form gangs. Do you know the highest rate of burglaries are committed by 16-year-old boys? The most violent behavior is 18-year-old boys. And as they get older, they grow up and mature. What you've got here is a lot of immature, selfish young men that have no guidance. So if you got out there with a speaker and say, stop this, and you have the voice of authority, they can't hear
Oh,
you.
I didn't mean to say stop it.
Okay?
I meant to no, because they wouldn't stop it.
No.
I meant to say their violence is turning on other Americans in hopes that they can escalate the violence so they can create more violence. This may give them an opportunity to shoot a policeman. Is this the police's problem? I'm talking about stripping the problem verbally naked. I'm not talking about telling them to quit. They're not going to quit.
No. No, they're
They're
not.
not going to quit. They're going to wait till somebody shoots them, and then it gets worse.
Remember, if there's a void in the community, anger, I mean, it's just like ISIS. Anger will fill that void. When you have love in a community and support in a community, it can quiet everything down. Uh, but it's not going to happen as long as we point the finger at somebody else as the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's the point. The point that is that the microphone should be pointing the finger at the people that are doing the destruction and blaming the police.
that's right. And
That's what, they should just be pointing the finger at what's happening, not telling anybody what to do, because
yeah,
that isn't going to work.
well, we have a lot of leaders, I mean, leaders pointing the finger at the police. And until they stop that and say, you know what, we are responsible as people, responsible people in the community, to look at ourselves and to see what we are doing wrong and what we can do to change it. That is how you get change to happen. As long as we're looking at somebody else as the problem, you're never going to solve the problem.
Also, when these kids that grow up angry can use their anger as an excuse for victimization to make somebody else pay, that is not a free ticket. Nobody grew up in a perfect world. This isn't a perfect world. I'll bet you $1 to a donut that their parents didn't have a perfect life to give them.
Well, they didn't. And you know what? I didn't have a perfect life. I was abandoned in a foreign country, but I don't go out and shoot people or do things, terrible things to people or destroy property. But this is a spiritual problem.
Right.
This is a chaos within the human spirit. And unless you address what I can do to change myself, and you start telling, and the pastors in these communities have got to tell these young people, you have the power to change who you were to who you can be and progress and be a productive member of the community. That is what needs to change. We need new leadership. We need new people and new voices and new role models. That can happen. And if you want to know how that can happen, go to our website, safekidsnow.com, and look at our program called Safe Neighborhoods Program for Community Leaders. We have all the information you need to turn these cities around. And it can be done. It's going to take work. We can't sit back there and point the fingers anymore. We're going to have to say, okay, we got a problem. Now, what are we going to do about it?
We really need that. If we taught in general, in every way, no matter what position we're from, that the responsibility lies in each one of us. The children that are over 18 years old and refuse to grow up because life was imperfect, they say, well, I think America owes me a living because my ancestors were enslaved. How many times have I heard that? I was born a slave, sold
We
as a
all,
slave.
we all can make
That, come on,
excuses.
get real. So what? What happens is you were dealt a bad hand. It can strengthen you if you'll let it. You can
Right.
turn right around and help people out of the same mess you were born into if you've got the courage to do it.
Well, and you know very much about that because you grew up in a cult and you had to escape a cult, which is practically impossible to do. But you and I both had difficult childhoods and we were able to escape. Anybody can take charge of their life and make it better for everybody around them. But they have to realize, stop blaming, stop being dependent on somebody else to tell you who you are, and start looking within yourself to find that inner strength and inner spirit and inner resilience that we all have in order to make a better person and to make our communities better and our neighborhoods better and ourselves better.
We need to realize that my unhappiness, your unhappiness, anybody's unhappiness
Yeah.
isn't a free ticket to go make somebody else unhappy.
Mm. Well,
It's not. That doesn't help.
we need some leadership changes here.
We need leadership changes badly. We
Bad.
need leaders that will lead by example,
Yes.
not
And
by
not the
prestige,
example.
not by prestige.
No, and not by, we have a lot of leaders that gain a lot of money as a result of sending the wrong message.
Right.
People want to hear the wrong message because then they don't have to change their behavior. They don't have to do anything. All they have to do is, I blame you. Well, that can change. And you know what? It will change. It's changing already. I know it's changing already. So
Thanks
I'm
to
encouraged.
thanks to wonderful people like you, you're correct.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. It's always good to talk to you.
I want to thank you so much for this wonderful interview today. I deeply appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I always love talking to you. Put it
Thank
together.
you. You're a wonderful subject, and I always enjoy my time spent with you.